You're listening to a Ghost Radio special feature interview with your host, Lia Ramses.
Cassandra Eason is one of the world's most prolific authors on witchcraft, having written over 70 books which have been translated into 13 different languages. A regular on radio and TV, including her own weekly mini-series, Sixth Sense, on UK cable television, Cassandra is considered an expert in the field of crystals, folklore, Celtic wisdom, Wicca, fairies, sacred sites, earth energies, natural magic, psychic children, and all that good stuff. Cassandra is currently touring Australia and New Zealand, and we have been very lucky enough to snag some time with her now out of her very, very busy schedule. Welcome to Ghost Radio, Cassandra.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be talking to you.
This is your first trip to Australia.
It is, and I'm absolutely blown away. Because when I was a little girl, I grew up right in the centre of the industrial Midlands, and my dad, who worked in the factory, he used to play this amazing game with me. We used to pretend to be on an aeroplane. He always used to say, we were going to Sydney, we were going to Brisbane. I don't think he got a clue where they were. And 60 years later, I've made it.
How exciting.
Oh, I've had the most wonderful time. And I still stand there with my jaw open when I see parrots flying down the street and ibis walking around. It's just, the wildlife here is wonderful. The scenery is incredible. But everybody is amazingly open. Everybody's amazingly friendly because, you know, sometimes in some parts of the UK people can be very reserved, but here it's absolutely brilliant. And I'm quite sorry my ancestors ran too fast to get the boats.
You were hoping they'd stolen some bread and got 7 years as well.
Well, that's right. As I say, they were good runners, my ancestors.
Now, your original training is actually in teaching with an honours in psychology. That's a bit of a jump from fairies and past lives.
Exactly. When my middle son Jack was 3, he said one morning that his father had fallen off his motorbike when it was actually happening 40 miles away. And we synchronised the times because my husband's motorbike stopped. The clock actually stopped on it as he skidded on a patch of oil. And I was sitting at home with the baby, now 24, waiting for John to come home to take over the early morning shift with the kids. And so the amazing thing was that the timing was so accurate. And my husband was a journalist at the time, and he wrote an article for a newspaper called The Guardian in the UK. And the strange thing was, nobody responded to that whatsoever. Nobody said anything. They were quite embarrassed. Of course, he, being very logical, was trying to explain it all away. But lots of women came up to me and said, oh, my child has known something was going to happen. My child has perhaps seen a dead granny, or they talk to fairies. And so I became very interested, and I decided to write a book on psychic children. But again, of course, being in the psychological world, I thought I was going to be able to explain it, because although I'd had experiences as a kid, I'd always been told that they were my imagination. But of course, when I started to write about it, I found that some of these experiences you simply could not explain away. Like the little girl who was sitting at home and she said to her mother, why has that old lady over there got her nightie and a hat on? And of course her mother thought the little girl was just imagining it. But when her mother asked the neighbours, it turned out that the lady who lived in the house previously had died sitting in the chair wearing a nightie, trying a hat on for a wedding. So it's amazing. From that, I found this amazing but quite hidden world, because people just didn't talk about psychic experiences, and even now it's quite a taboo subject, except in the pagan community.
Yes, it's and yet I always say everybody has, you know, I say ghost story, but you can ask anybody and they will have some story where they can say, well, there was this one time, you know, and even if they never think about it again, everybody has had some experience that they cannot explain and that stays with them. So I don't know why it's so hidden.
No, but you're so right. I mean, I even have had, there was a surgeon who was operating on my son's eyes and his ear, and I was talking to the surgeon about my work, and he said, oh, well, when I was a little boy, I used to see an old man in a top hat standing in the garden who would just disappear, and it turned out that the old man had owned the house and died there. But the surgeon said, but of course it can't be true, it must have been imagination, there must be an explanation. And the more logical you are, the more you try to explain it away, and the more you tie yourself in knots, because I think people are very afraid of what can't be explained, because as a modern generation, we like to have everything weighed and measured and analysed.
And yes, and structured, and it makes us feel safe in some strange kind of a way, doesn't it?
Oh, totally. And of course, once you start talking ghosts, you're into the taboo, the death business, and people, again, are very afraid of the idea there's this amazing disposable, anything can be replaced, anything can be fixed, and then you find out that perhaps an elderly relative is dying, and it just throws everything, because you think, well, it can't be, this is the modern world, why can't we fix it? And we do push death away, and after a funeral, everybody's saying, get over it, come on, back to life. And we don't have the mourning period, and so the idea that our loved ones can return is something that's, it's almost considered improper. It's almost considered, oh, you shouldn't be dealing with that sort of stuff. That's spooky stuff.
Yes, it's quite a strange thing, and sometimes I think that we are making steps forward, and that it is coming out a bit more in the open. But then at other times, I sometimes feel like there's a group of us again, the only people who kind of understand each other, and like you say, feel most comfortable in the pagan community. Yeah,
and the problem is with a lot of films, witchcraft, magic, children's psychic experiences are so sensationalised. And so you don't really get anything between the ghost in the white sheet and the scary horror movie. And I know when I was working on my Psychic Kids book, I'd asked my son's school if I could talk to the children about their invisible friends, and he said, oh, no, we don't have anything like that here. And yet the next day I was invited to a show about Spooksville with the kids dressed up, clanking chains, white sheets, the lot, eating ghoul burgers.
Yes.
And he couldn't see
what the difference was, yeah. And it's and the thing that gets me here with Halloween is, of course, my husband's American, so my kids always want to do Halloween, but of course I've given them the background. But then when they go to school, there's this bit of a joint. Some parents will let kids do it, some parents won't let their kids do it, and I always say to them, we're in Australia, it's not actually Halloween. I'm always this lone voice saying, it's actually not Halloween. If you'd really like to know the history behind this, I'd like to tell you. But no one wants to listen to me, Cassandra.
No. And also with on my Halloween, which of course is October the 31st.
And it is Halloween in that part of the world.
Yeah, I've always treated it as the day of the ancestors, and we always used to remember my deceased mother, Granny Beryl, who my kids never knew, and we'd bake her favourite recipes, and I'd tell the family stories and get the pictures out. So it was very much, as it is in countries like Mexico and France, it's a time to welcome the ancestors back to the hearth, to say, yes, we are all one. It doesn't matter what time, because the Japanese have their Bon Festival in August, I believe. So it doesn't matter when you do it, but the time of the ancestors is a time to say, hey, we're not just the 2.4 family. We stretch back into the past, and we carry. It's not a question of calling spooky ghosts into your family, but those who have lived and loved and were returned, and who are part of us. We carry them in our genes.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's right. And you really are. You must write in your sleep. I mean, it's just, you've got so many titles, and I was telling you before this interview that I thought, how am I going to get Cassandra condensed into this hour? And a little voice said to me, have the people in your house pick a subject. So that's what I did. So tonight I picked a couple of subjects out of a hat, and I've decided that this must be what the people listening tonight need to hear about. So can I just throw a couple of these titles at you, Cassandra, and you can tell us your wisdom on these things?
I'll try and catch them. I'm not very good at catching.
Okay, divination, I guess your book, A Complete Guide to Divination, and of course you've got other titles with the runes and the tarot and stuff. Well, first, tell us of what the ways of divination are throughout.
Well, actually, I've got a new book coming out in Australia called Becoming Clairvoyant with Piakas, which takes everybody through lots of different methods, but shows them how to develop it. And of course, divination sounds a very strange word, but what it really means is listening to the wisdom within. And in the book, but generally, divination started walking out in nature, listening to the wind in the trees, listening to the water, looking up at the clouds and seeing pictures, asking a question, and then letting your clairvoyance, which is just the extension of ordinary sight, your inner sight, give you an image and answer a question. I mean, one of my favourite methods, I've got a crystal ball, and I don't have one of these wonderful clear ones that you're supposed to see television pictures in. It's an old cracked one with lots and lots of marks, and you can buy them so cheaply. And when you look in it, you see pictures. Say, for example, I wondered, coming to Australia, I was saying to myself, dare I go? I'm an old girl, I'm over 60, dare I go? And in the crystal ball, I saw a bird. And so, okay, my first question to myself was, what sort of a bird is it? Is it a nesting bird? You know, should be settling down. No, it had got its wings outspread. And when I looked again at the image, and of course the image was being created from the physical lines, but at the same time, my inner mind, my deep wisdom was giving me the answers. And the bird was sitting there in a cage, but the cage door was open. It was spreading its wings, and it was trying to get them out. And of course, I really, really wanted to come to Australia, but part of me was scared because it was such a long way, and I was thinking, I can't. Although I was meeting my son in New Zealand, I thought, I can't go all that way by myself. Supposing they will hate me. Supposing I get lost. Supposing I got my 1,001 reasons for not coming. But the bird was trying to get out, and as I watched the picture, my mind showed me the bird coming out of the cage. So divination isn't usually telling us anything really weird. It's telling us what we know deep down, but we can't see. So it's a very, very personal thing. And our ancestors that use things like runes, markings, they're just markings on stones, or tarot cards, or, as I say, the clouds in the sky. Whatever you use, they're ways of picking up what your conscious, logical mind is blocking out. And in the old days, you see, divination means listening to the divas or the diva within, the god or the goddess within. But of course, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, people saw the gods and the goddesses as big, wise powers.
So I guess divination is a way of reconnecting to the source and putting the logical mind aside to answer your own questions?
It is, and sometimes you will see something totally, totally unexpected, because, you see, time itself is very, very fluid. For example, when I flew here on the plane, I started off 9 o'clock at Heathrow in London, and we had dinner on the plane, and then the stewards put the blinds down. But of course, after 2 or 3 hours, it was light. And I was saying, it's morning. No, they say it's night time. And by the time I got here, I'd lost so many hours. But I hadn't really lost them. I was still all the time. But the clocks were changing. And then when we came from New Zealand to Australia, the time changed again. When I'm talking to my kids back in England, they're 10 hours behind me. In the 1700s and in the 1500s in Europe, they actually knocked 11 days off the calendar, and people went crazy because they said their life had been stolen. So time is something that's very, very relative, and so it is quite possible using divination to see into the future. Not the fixed future, because the future depends on what we choose to do. And very old traditions like the Vikings, they had their Norns who wove the web of fate, the web of fate, and as they wove the web of fate, they were constantly changing it. And so what you can see are the points on the web. You can see, if I take that choice, I don't take that choice. And by doing that, you suddenly stop being at the mercy of fate, and you think, yes, I'm going to make that change, or No, I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait. It's all about putting ourselves in control of time. And it's such a simple concept, really. It's very, very simple. And yet people put this great mystique in it. The possibilities. And once you know the possibilities, once you can see them, then you become the master or mistress of your fate. You can't stop everything happening, but you can react and you can make choices.
Yes. So if you had perhaps decided not to come to Australia, it just means not that your future had changed, but you had not chosen that particular road that had been outlaid for you. You'd chosen another one.
So I wouldn't have opened the Australian market to me in the same way.
Yes, yeah.
What I would have done, in fact, I would have stayed at home and I would either have written a book for the UK or I would have chosen to have gone to France to see my web manager, and we might have done more online courses.
Yeah.
But by coming to Australia, I have changed my fate because I've met people. I've met you. I've now met you. I've met people whom I wouldn't have known who've said to me, okay, come back next year. And so now I am planning a year ahead, where if I hadn't come, that whole web would not have opened to me.
So it's really quite, when people say, oh, it's all up to fate, it's not really. It's all up to you.
It's up to you. Yes, of course you can't predict that things won't happen to you, but you do have a lot more control. And a lot of these things, these coincidences, they're often not. I mean, let me give you a very simple example. My middle son, Jack, was travelling through Spain, and he left his friends in Barcelona, and he's gone down to Malaga because he'd lost his passport. When he came back to Barcelona, Jack had lost everything. He'd got no idea where the campsite was. He'd got no idea where his friends were. He'd lost their numbers. He was stuck in Barcelona with virtually nothing. So my son Jack walked up the main street, and he met two people from the town he lived in England. And they said, "Hi, Jack." And he said, "I'm lost." So they said, "Oh, come back with us." And then they went off. So the next day he thought, what shall I do? I don't know where my friends are. I don't know what to do. So he went and sat in Burger King. And who should walk into Burger King out of all Barcelona but the guy he was camping with? And the only reason that guy had gone into Burger King was he'd gone into Starbucks and the toilets had been closed.
Wow.
But I've had so many seemingly coincidences like that. See, some people would say, yes, Jack's guardian angel is working overtime, he's on Prozac. But other people would say Jack telepathically, if he'd had the energy, linked with his friend and said, "Hey mate, I'm lost in Barcelona, come find me."
So he created his own reality.
Yeah, and by a process called psychokinesis, which is a psychic power, same thing people use when they spoon bend, although we don't do that very often, unless you're Uri Geller. He drew towards him the person he needed. Or on the other hand, you could say, well, they were all walking along their little lines on the web, and their lines crossed because it was part of a wider picture.
Yes, that they were to come back together again.
So the fact is, we can't measure, we can't weigh, we can't prove psychic phenomena, and that is where your problems come. Most of the psychic phenomena I have come across has been spontaneous, and because of that, you can't repeat it in the laboratory.
Yes.
And because of that, the scientists will say to me, well, it can't be true, because we can't repeat it. All we can do are fairly trivial card-guessing experiments.
Do you find that a bit of a narrow-minded, narrow-minded viewpoint?
Yeah, it's because people need to prove things within a certain framework. And of course, the scientific logical framework is very, very useful. But once you come onto human emotions, once you come onto people's experiences, they don't fit in the box. And therefore, the scientists become totally illogical. And they say, we can't measure it, therefore it cannot be true. And another example of that was my young daughter Miranda, who's now the original baby of the Jack experience on the motorbike, who's now in 24, she was, about 2 years ago, she was at home, she was cooking herself a pot of pasta, and she walked out of the kitchen, and someone turned her round, and she knew it was my deceased mother, although she'd never met her, because my mother takes care of her. And when Miranda turned round, she saw she'd switched on the wrong electric ring, and the tea towel was hanging over the lighted ring. And she was actually physically turned round.
That's happened to me, and if you've ever had, not that particular thing with the tea towel, but if you've ever had an experience like that, it's very surreal, and you are really just a participant in that. And then you kind of think, wow, what was that? You know, it's and I always think, and generally it's something like that where I had somebody take over the wheel of my car once, a steering wheel, and steer me up onto a curb seconds before I hit a bus. And I kind of just was up on the curb, and I had two young babes in the back. And I remember thinking, wow, that was close, and then very closely followed by, thank you very much. And then, who did that, you know? And whether it was my guardian angel or the kid's guardian angel or whoever, who cares? You know, we were pushed out of the way of the bus.
But then on the other level, you think, well, why not? Why, we are, after all, spiritual beings in a physical body. And so it's not surprising that other spiritual energies are still round us and part of us. And I believe that we can develop these powers. I believe you can learn to talk to angels, not the old, you know, Archangel Michael popped in and told me, you know, what was going to win the lottery, but these higher energies, we can link into them. It's like with divination, we can learn through developing clairvoyance. Simple things like looking into water and maybe dropping ink or dropping oils. And I know you have a very great interest in Egypt, and of course the Egyptians used oil on water again to create moving images. And all these things you can learn to develop your psychic inner eye. And also you can learn clairsentience is one of the easiest senses. This is a thing I'm sure you've had lots of times when you walk into a place and you think, oh no, I don't like this place, or oh, I don't trust that person. It's like your instinct, your gut kicks in.
Exactly. And I think divination too, everybody has like a favourite form, whether it be cards or runes or as you say, I generally will ask for a sign, and for me it's usually a bug or a butterfly or something like that, or numbers, particularly if I see numbers. It's like, you know, Creator isn't fussy. Whatever way you're going to take notice really is how the message will be delivered.
Exactly. And it's such a useful art. It's something that, I mean, when you think about it, the most successful business people are those that trust their intuitions, trust their hunches.
Exactly.
They're the ones that go that step further.
I want to talk to you now about fairies. You're a complete guide to fairies and magical beings. Fabulous book. And I've got to say, if you Google Cassandra's name, any book review you pull up is so positive. I don't know if you've done that yourself, Cassandra, about you've Googled your own name, but I did before our chat tonight, and I read a lot of book reviews about a lot of your titles, and every single one is so positive, and it kind of makes you feel as if the reader's been given a gift. So congratulations for that.
Thank you. And since I've been in Australia, I've become very aware of your indigenous spirits, the ones that do belong to the trees, that belong to the land. And I know that the settlers brought many, many fairies with them, many, many gnomes, many, many elves. But I'm very much researching now these Australian spirits. And so if anyone's listening and they do have any experiences, any information, I would be very, very grateful, and I would credit you in any future books by writing to me at my website, which is www.Cassandra Eason, all one word, but I know you said you will have it actually on the site.
Cassandra's beautiful pictures on the web page now, and underneath that you can get all the information of where to buy Cassandra's books, probably from her web page, or if Amazon, you can get all the titles there, or probably Angus and Robertson, which is one of our biggest bookstores, also has them over here. But there's many ways you can get Cassandra's books, whatever title kind of grabs you, and you can get over to Cassandra's web page. So it's all on the front page there. Just click on Cassandra's picture and all the information will be freely available to you.
I'm always very, very keen to learn all the time I'm travelling from people who have experiences. So I would be incredibly grateful of any personal knowledge, because after all, I'm coming to Australia as a visitor for a few weeks, where many of you have grown up. Even in the city, you get these little, they seem to be very, very small, very, very dark, but I'd love to know a lot more about them.
I was going to say, so have you invoked any fairies or of our nature beings while you're here? What have you come across since you've been here?
Well, very much when we were up in the Blue Mountains near Sydney, and today we were, I think it's called Springbok Mountain, up near the Gold Coast. There were some very old, they were Antarctic beaches, I believe, and they are hundreds and hundreds of years old, and there were seemed to be very many small brown beings around them. Very, very, how can I describe it? They were very real earthy, real old, real. They were the kind of spirits, they weren't like pretty little fairies, they were the kind of spirits who say, hey, this is my place, be respectful, look, but don't look for too long.
Mm-hmm. And
so I would love to know more about these little creatures. And I mean, I have got a little bit about sort of fairies in the Southern Hemisphere in my book, but these are something that the feeling I get is they have been here almost as long as the land.
I was going to tell you after, but I'll give you a brief rundown now and we can chat after the interview. But it's funny you should say that about what they look like, because very, very long story short, my brother about 20 years ago went missing in the Australian outback for 11 days, and he was found, thankfully. But
right.
While he was out there, he had water. He stuck by a river. He didn't have much food, so he did become dehydrated and obviously quite unwell, but he always had water. But
yes.
At night, when he was sleeping, he used to pull paper bark off our trees, because that's what the Aboriginals did. They pulled
yes.
off paper bark and then they laid it over them, because obviously he was very cold. And I asked him one day about what kind of stuff might have happened when he was out there. And Gary's not he's not one to be, very kind of forward in yeah, exactly. But anyway, he said to me, well, I'll tell you once. While I was asleep, particularly towards the end, he said, I was so cold, Lia, and I was shivering and I was shaking, and I was trying to keep this paper bark pulled up around me. And he said, and then the little brown things came. And I said, the what? And he said, and he called them the Barkers Union, just because he had to give them a name, Yeah. And he said they were little brown beings that ran around him all night, tucking the paper bark inside of him to keep him warm. And at this point, he's thinking, I've been out here too long, I've gone crazy. But he said to me that, particularly the last end of before he was found, that these little brown beings came out at night and tucked the paper bark around him at night to keep him warm. And so I said, you never felt, unsafe? He said, oh, no. He said, if anything, they helped me. But I think that's very interesting that you should bring that up.
Yes, that was what I saw. So... yes. So obviously a lot of people who are connecting with this talk will also have had experience of them.
So please do write to Cassandra and tell her about your Australian fairy stories.
And I will I will send you the feedback.
Good, yes, that would be fantastic. Past lives, which is one of my favourite things. Can our past lives affect us in the here and now?
Yes, I believe that. So I do actually believe we do have past lives, but even if you don't, I believe that you can connect with the lives of your ancestors or someone who had a life that relates to yours, a kind of spiritual ancestor. And to me, the important thing is not only to overcome things from the past, but also to bring back the strengths you maybe had in those past worlds that right now you need in this life. Maybe courage you had if you were someone who travelled on a boat over long seas. Maybe if you were someone who did have a very, very hard life on the land. Those strengths can be very, very useful to us. So to me, past lives are very, very positive. But I've come across some interesting experiences, and the most spontaneous ones come from kids under 7, as you probably know. And there was a little boy in the northeast of England, and when he was about 2.5, Adrian started to say to his mother, "Oh, that place over there by the bridge is where I crashed my plane." And no, it didn't crash. I crashed it away from the town. So his mother was very curious about this, and she went to the local museum, and sure enough, during the Second World War, a pilot had actually crashed his plane in the spot the little boy identified, because what had happened, he was coming back on a bombing raid, and he knew he wasn't going to make it. He didn't want to land on the town, so he let the crew bail out, and he crashed it in the moors. And so the mother got a book about this hero, and the little boy, when he was under 3, was pointing to pictures of this pilot when he was a little boy at school, saying, "That's me, that's me."
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And you're right, it does seem to happen to the very young who are able to, they quite often say things like, "When I was your mummy."
That's right.
And the parent can say, "What did you say?" But it does come out quite a lot. Remember when I was your mummy before I drowned in the pool. And it can be quite kind of confronting to some parents, but eerily enough, it's generally turning out to be quite accurate.
Yes, it is, and especially, like you say, these ones that say, "When I was your grandma, I did this." And I came across a South African woman who, her little girl Victoria was saying, "When I was your grandmother, I used to do your hair like this." And this little tiny dot did her hair up in a very elaborate bun, and she would say, when I was your grandmother, we lived in this place. And there were places the child had never been. So it does seem that, again, children have this very pure knowledge because they haven't been to school, they haven't had the right brain knocked out of them, and the logic and the learning kicked in, which of course are important. But the other time when past lives seem to occur quite strongly are in adolescence, when a teenager loses their strong sense of identity. And again, they're saying, "Who am I?" And I mean, my own son, Bill, who is now 20, has had very many experiences of this kind, and I know he's been to places, and he's linked into them in a way that he has to be connected with them.
Mm-hmm. It's very, that was my next question. I mean, as you said, John and I have a very strong affinity to Egypt, to the point where we had our last name changed to reflect that. But does that mean that we had a past life in Egypt?
I would say you had a very significant one, because when we're drawn to a particular place and we seem to know a lot about it, without learning, and you'll know something and then you'll read about it or hear about it and you think, "Oh, I knew that." I think it's because certain lives are like key past lives. They're ones when particularly significant things happened. In your case, you and your husband together obviously had a very significant life. That doesn't mean you were a Pharaoh and Mrs. Pharaoh. You might well have been a pot maker and, the lady who cleaned up after the donkey. But even so, you had some very strong, obviously spiritual experiences there.
Exactly. And, Egypt is a common one, but my middle daughter has the strongest, strangest affection for Finland, of all places. Most kids say they want to travel and they want to go to Europe, they want to go to Spain. My daughter says she wants to go to Finland.
Yes, and I'm sure when she goes there, she will identify places.
And I said to her, "Finland? What do you want to go to Finland for?" She said, "I don't know, but I have to go."
I'm sure when she goes, she will understand why, because I believe very strongly in these spiritual roots we have.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if say your family has lived in the same place for, I don't know, like 900 years or whatever, it's maybe not as strong as if you come from a relatively new country. It's like America.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people in America, a lot of people in Australia have very, very strong spiritual roots in these very, very old cultures. And I've noticed that very, very strongly. And I don't know whether it is because it is a relatively new country to be settled, or whether for some reason there's something in the land that links you back.
Can places like Lemuria and Atlantis and even off-world lives, if you want to go kind of in that direction, can they be proven? Is probably not the right word, but could that be explained by things like past lives?
No, but since we had the dreadful tsunami
Mm-hmm.
in the Far East, and we know, for example, that in Minoan Crete, around about 1,400 BC, they had these huge tidal waves that destroyed civilizations. So we know that nature can wipe out a civilization. And there are so many unexplained things. For example, how could a relatively simple farming people like the Egyptians, within 500 years, suddenly have this wonderful spiritual system where they have hieroglyphs, a complex religion? Before long, they're building pyramids. How can, again, people with antler picks in Western Europe have created these astronomical stone circles that are aligned to complex sun, moon, planet cycles? How could they have done it if the knowledge hadn't come from somewhere? Because we know from the archaeology that they were simple farming people.
Yeah, it doesn't gel, does it? I mean, the solar system ones always get me. You know, I think it was a Dogon tribe who knew of Sirius and things like that. I mean, that's just astounding. Right. You know, astounding.
And there are so many unexplained phenomena that while you can't say yes, Lemuria existed, yes, Atlantis existed, you can say that there are so many things we don't understand.
And perhaps leave it at that until we do understand them.
That's right. And of course, recently I wrote a book for the American library system on fabulous creatures and strange animals, and you'll get accounts from well-respected Roman and Greek historians like the Roman Pliny in the 3rd century, who described how there was actually a phoenix in Rome, kept in the capital for a short time. And you get, St. Jerome described seeing centaurs, the half-horse, half-man, in the desert. And it may well be that these fabulous creatures, like the unicorns, that again were described by historians, maybe they did die out like the Tasmanian tiger.
Exactly, yeah. And maybe in 100 years' time we'll be calling that a mythical creature and fabulous, monster. But
exactly, and we'll be saying, well, the ordinary, the white Siberian tiger. Well, they used to be creatures that walked on the earth, and in 1,000 years, people will say, no, there were never white tigers.
It's very true. And that book, Fabulous Creatures, Mythical Monsters and Power Animal Symbols, is absolutely fabulous. It's all the covers of your books too are really nice.
I have nothing to do with those, I have to say. I mean, I did once actually get thrown out of an art examination because the art teacher thought I was actually taking the mickey. And I was really trying to do a really serious picture.
Bet you didn't go back to
her class. I don't design my covers.
But that one particularly, and the Fairies one, I think is beautiful.
Fairies is beautiful. The Fairies is lovely. And that was a book that I was very, very interested in knowing why people believed in these things. And of course you get the wonderful stories of the little Celtic people who went and lived in the forest in their round houses, and maybe the tall new tribes that came regarded them as fairies because they hid in the undergrowth, because they didn't come out. And again, it's very hard to separate the history from the myth, but somewhere between the two, I think you get the reality.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree completely. Let's chat about animal totems. Everybody has one, I presume?
Absolutely, and of course, people actually resemble animals. You can say.
I agree. Yeah.
He was like a bear with a sore head, or you get the little squirrel in the office who's running around putting all the drawing pins in neat piles and hiding them in her drawers.
Mm.
But power animals they were regarded by a lot of, I mean, like the Australian Aboriginals, the Maoris, the native North Americans, the Celts, they were regarded as a particularly pure form of particular powers, particular strengths. And when you read lots of the old legends, especially in places like native North America, of the beaver who brought up the earth, or in China you have the wading birds that dived down and created the world. And it's a way, I think, of saying these power animals, the clan animals, the lord of the animals, the lady of the animals, they're ways of saying we have much to learn from the natural world, and we're not separate, we're not something set above them. They have their wisdom, they have their purities, and of course, on a very basic level, animals and birds were here before us.
Very true, very true. So we can... I know some people feel like that, like I have a strong affinity to frogs, and that's always been with me, but then I know I have things that come and go, a bee will come in for a short while.
Yes, your frogs, of course, are very linked, as you know, to Heket, the ancient Egyptian frog goddess, who breathed life into the clay figures, the human figures that her husband, the potter god, made. And, of course, when the Nile flooded, all the frogs came, and people saw it as a symbol of fertility, and Heket was actually the midwife goddess that people called to her, women in labour called to her, and the frogs were also a symbol of money coming with the fertility of the Nile. So I think your frog is one of your ancient symbols, but your bee, the bee, again, is a Neolithic symbol of the bee goddess, the one who brings abundance, the one who brings good things. And lots of women they have this affinity to certain animals, bears that are healers, bees, and frogs as well. And I think frogs are beautiful.
I once read that the frog, the noises that a frog make is very much like the way Buddhists would chant. It's very close to almost Mother Earth's mantra or chant. And every time I hear a frog croak now, that makes me smile, because I could understand that. I thought, well,
yes,
when the frog's croaking away, it's kind of like he's chanting to Mother Earth, and I think that's beautiful.
Yes, and they say, don't they, that after Jesus died, it was a mother frog who comforted the Virgin Mary, and the Virgin Mary said that henceforward frogs would always be blessed, and where there were frogs, the water would be pure.
Did she? I didn't know that. That's very interesting.
Well, there are so many laws, because the frog is such a fantastic creature of transformation, going from the spawn right through to the frog. It's also it's like the butterfly, the symbol of rebirth, the idea, and I think it was St. Teresa of Avila in the 16th century who described when people died how it was like the butterfly coming from the chrysalis.
Mm-hmm. Very, the butterfly is always, to me, just, it's been, if you look at a butterfly, and I guess if you look at a frog going from tadpole to a frog, if you really look at something and really look at the symbolism of something, it is pretty self-explanatory, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and the problem in the modern world is we don't trust ourselves. The older peoples, even back in the folklore of 100 years ago, people much more had the stories. They trusted their instincts. And one of the things I found is that a lot of the old stories have died. People don't tell them. This is partly, I think, a television thing. I think it's partly because we have this constant, I mean, I have this wonderful idea of sort of, because we have neighbours in the UK, and I sit and I watch it avidly. I have the idea of, all Australians sitting in the street outside barbecues and never looking at a television and never getting stressed. But of course, it's not like that, is it?
No.
And so, but I do think that things like, although, I mean, in fairness, I think you have a much more outdoor life than we do, but when I work in Sweden, I notice that the families I'm with, they've got them fabulous pine forests outside, and they're all sitting watching The Simpsons. And
yes.
I think so many people, certainly in Europe, sit and watch television while they eat, and the families don't talk so much, and maybe you don't see grandma or great-grandma so much, and so the old stories don't go on. One of the things I'm very, very keen on doing, and I've written a new book called Pagan in the City, about collecting. One of the things is about collecting the old family stories. All those psychic moments, all those wonderful moments, all those memories that you think you'll remember forever. And 3 months later, they're gone.
Yes.
And I didn't do that early enough, I didn't collect enough. And it's such a treasury, especially now we've got computers and digicameras. We can hand on this wonderful legacy to future generations.
Yes, exactly. And we can, and it is amazing. I mean, after my grandmother died, going through the bits and pieces that she collected was just amazing. And I realised that in her wisdom, and I've kept those and can pass them down to my girls and my son, and hopefully they'll be able to keep it going, as it were. But I absolutely support all that you're saying, that the family unit, and particularly the wisdom of the, shall we say, the crone energy and all that is very undervalued, very undervalued.
It is, and many of the old folk remedies, you find out that they are just as good as not all, but as some of the modern pharmaceutical remedies.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
But I'm very, very keen on collecting memory boxes, handing on the treasures of the past. I mean, I know when I say to people, I had a ration book because I was born in 1948 and I didn't have a banana till I was 5 years old. And the things of our childhood, the songs, the old skipping rhymes, all these things. Every family has got stories of how great-grandfather did this, of how someone came from a long, long distance to do something, how the family built up. And these, to me, these are our heritage. These are the magic of tomorrow.
And the indigenous cultures, I think, still do that. I know a friend of mine who's Aboriginal, he said the worst thing that could have happened to the Aboriginal people is when they started writing things down, because then the stories weren't told the way they used to be told, which was orally, down the line, down the line, down the line. And somebody was actually responsible for those stories. They were the storyteller and the story keeper. But when we started writing these things down, unfortunately, that we lost that oral tradition. So it's hard to know where to find that balance sometimes.
Yes, it is. But this is one of the times, going back to what you were saying, Halloween. This is a wonderful time for letting the kids have their party and things, but sitting them down for a family meal and sharing those old stories and making sure, and Christmases and all those times when we've celebrated something, when everybody's eaten, instead of either slumping in front of the television or walking around bored, to actually maybe go outside and talk about the old ways. And we can, but just because we have computers, which are wonderful for recording things, equally the oral tradition goes hand in hand. And I'm surprised how few children now know what I call the old folk songs.
Yeah, or even know what they mean. I mean, if explaining London bridges to my children, I said, do you know what that actually means? And then you can get into it from there. Why was London Bridge falling down? And I find it interesting the way whole history lessons are contained sometimes in songs.
Yes, they are. And again, it's very, very easy because so many people now have their iPods, and they're sitting having music poured into them.
Mm.
They often don't sing. They don't speak. They don't. I think we are becoming, and it's a generalisation, but we are becoming a very passive, receptive culture.
Mm-hmm. We need to have
Instead
a few more...
of creating.
Yes, a few more original ideas, perhaps.
Yes, and creating another thing that I get very concerned about is doing things all the time, where children from a tiny age are out doing ballet, gymnastics, learning all these things, and often, of course they're important, but at weekends you're doing your chores, you're DIYing, you're exercising, you're not being. It's all about doing. And that's one of the things in this Pagan in the City book that I'm very... I suppose I really get on a soapbox about the idea of not thinking if you're not doing something, you're wasting time.
Yeah.
You're spending it in the forest, letting your mind clear, listening to the trees, listening to the water, listening to the birds.
Yeah, it's one of the things I did with my kids was I love gardening, absolutely love it, and started a vegetable garden with my kids. And, one grew carrots and the other one grew silver beet, and it's just been extraordinary how wonderful it's been. And the way that the bugs interact, and it's so important that, that they're doing their job, and the symbiosis of the whole thing. And I'll tell you what, I think they learnt more out of that veggie pat than they did in 10 years of school. I'll probably be shot for saying that, but that's the way I feel.
No. I'm sure you're right. And they had that wonderful satisfaction of seeing things grow.
Yes.
And that, again, is the respect for the earth. And that's very, very hard, because it's very easy to treat the earth as a larder, a food store, a rubbish dump, and to think, all this global stuff, it's all about somebody else and it's nothing to do with me. But once you go back to actually gardening or touching the earth, you think, this is where it all starts.
It's magnificent. I can't begin to tell you how much I love my garden, and I love my compost, and of course when in our veggie patch, we've got crystals in each corner, which
but that's lovely, because that energizes the soil, and crystals, they come from the earth, so why would they not enrich the earth? We know that crystals are used in watches, we know they're used in all sorts of things, but when you hold a crystal, you can feel its energy field. And crystals also, they make you feel harmonious. They make you, and interestingly enough, a little kid will often pick from a mixed bag of crystals, they'll pick something like a pink rose quartz or a purple amethyst that makes them feel calmer.
Very true.
It's an instinctive thing, and while it's important to learn, I think a lot of things are remembering, recalling, and trusting your instincts.
That's very true, yeah.
And people often say to me, well, like I'm doing a workshop tomorrow in Brisbane, and people often say to me at workshops, well, what am I supposed to do? Which way am I supposed to walk around? And I say, well, what feels right? Stand on the earth. What feels right? And they say, but there are rules. And I say, yeah, of course there are rules, and it's important to know what people say, but at the end of the day, trust yourself. There aren't gurus sitting up there in the sky checking you're casting your circle the right way, checking you've got your salt in the right place. It's what's in your heart, your intention. And because we are such a rule society, because we are such a society of expertise, we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust... I know when I had my first child, I was dreadful, because I'd done some psychology training. I was a teacher, and I had a big pile of books, and I was up at the doctor's every 5 minutes, and I was totally disconnected with my child, because I had to do it right.
Every single time. And, that's one of the things I love about paganism is if I happen to miss a festival or I don't have the right colour candle.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. And but it took me a long time to realise that. I would think, it's Tuesday and I have to do my ceremony today. It's all crap. That's not what it's meant to be about at all.
It's pressure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again, it's pressure to do it right. It's like when you think about it, there are books and books and books written about how to meditate, but you sit by a river or a waterfall, you look at a beautiful flower, you watch a baby sleeping, and you don't need to be taught to do that. You don't need to be taught to appreciate a sunset, and they're all forms of meditation. When you're walking around vacuuming, you're in that lovely trance state. You don't need to buy a book to be taught how to vacuum your floor. But at the same time, you can let your mind go free. And we sometimes, of course, it's very important to learn about meditation, but if you're sitting there thinking, what's the next stage? How many breaths should I have taken?
Yeah.
I've got, you're more stressed than when you started.
It's true. And that's what it's about. I mean, I get some of my best stuff when I'm watering.
Yes.
Out there watering, and I think, oh, wow, that's a fabulous idea.
Absolutely.
So it's true. A meditative state is very subject to what you think sometimes it can, technically, inverted commas, should be. It's all about being relaxed and being open, I guess.
Yes. And being, again, instead of doing, instead of thinking, what shall we do? I must do my meditation.
Exactly.
Think, okay, I'm going to just be. And I find that very hard, to give myself permission to do nothing. And that's why coming away has been very good. Although I've done lots of workshops, although I've done lots of lectures, I've actually had time where I have looked at beautiful scenery, where I have watched parrots in the trees, and I've been, and that's been a big learning experience for me, because it's very easy to get, even in the pagan community, even in the mind-body-spirit, to get on a different sort of hamster wheel and go faster and faster and faster.
Yeah, people get caught up, I think, in that productivity, and they don't realise allowing time to just sit and watch parrots and listen to waterfalls and just do nothing is so important. And yes, it might not be productive in the way that we've been taught that productivity should be, but it's probably more important than this productivity that we're all trying to strive for anyway.
Yes, you're totally right. It is. It's very important to have those times, because then you go back with enthusiasm, you go back with creativity. And
probably get more accomplished in that better frame of mind than, the previous weeks of productivity where you're running at half tank anyway. So,
and I find it very helpful to get back in touch with the cycles of the moon. And of course the first thing that amazed me was your moon actually points the other way. but then it's all part of the wheel of the world. I mean, we're in day when it's night in the northern hemisphere. You're in autumn going towards winter, as in the northern hemisphere we're going spring into summer. But the moon is very important, because the waxing, the increasing part of the moon, that's the time, I think, when people naturally do have this gentle but enthusiastic energy that builds up towards the full moon. And then as the moon wanes, of course you can't say to your boss, well, I'm not coming to work today because the moon's waning. But on the other hand, you can cut back on unnecessary activities. And I used to find with my kids, if I took them, say, to a theme park or something, when the moon was waning, there would be minor accidents, there would be fights, where if we did something very, very gentle, like go for a walk in the woods, or maybe we just sat and read, then they were getting in touch with the cycles. And I do quite a lot of work with women who are having problems conceiving. And this isn't witchcraft, this isn't magic. Women get very, very anxious when they come off the pill and they find they don't have a baby. And of course there are often physical reasons, but sometimes there aren't. Sometimes it's just you get on the ovulation chart, you get on the, we've got to make love tonight, and your body freezes up. But getting back in touch with the moon, like people who used to conceive on the full moon, is often a very, very good way of getting yourself off the hamster wheel of, I've been trying for 3 months and nothing's happened.
Yeah. It's so true. It's so true. Do you think things like Harry Potter and that whole phenomena which has overtaken us, do you think that's been good for us and paganism in general, or has it been a bit of a double-edged sword? Or
I think it's, yes. I mean, I would not at all knock Harry Potter, but the problem is it makes magic very either glamorized or dangerous, or it takes it out of the real world into a fantasy world, and it's something you have to go to a special school, you have to be specially gifted to learn, and you have to face all these dreadful dangers, where to me magic is an ordinary property of everyone's life that people have known about for hundreds of years. So that's my problem with Harry Potter, that children especially think that you wave the wand, hey presto, and it appears. They forget that, yes, you do the spell, and then you have to go out and you have to do the hard work, which our ancestors knew. Yes,
exactly. It's I must say that happened with my youngest child, is, she was saying everything right, and why wasn't it happening, and I mean, it's good because everything opens up opportunities to then explain further and blah, 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 blah. But if kids don't have that, it can make them feel, that they're a failure or that they're not magic, which you would never want any child to think that. That'd just be because all children are magic. We are all magic.
Special effects magic is very artificial, and that's what Harry Potter is. It's special effects.
Yeah, exactly. Cassandra, we are way out of time, and I could just chat to you forever. So I just want to wrap up tonight again by giving out Cassandra's webpage, which is www.cassandraeason.co.uk. Everything is on the webpage again, like Ghost Radio or Underworld Show. Just click on through to Cassandra's site. You can contact her through email there. Of course, she's going to be in Australia and New Zealand for a couple more weeks now doing some workshops. She also is a regular contributor to Spheres and Spellcraft magazine with the lovely people down there, Leela and Shay. So there's many, many ways to hear and read more of Cassandra's work. But you've been every bit as fabulous as I knew you would be, Cassandra. Thank you.
I'm also writing for a column now for Rainbow News in New Zealand.
Good. So the people in New Zealand who are listening, you can get the Rainbow News and read what Cassandra's written there. I just can't believe how much you've written. You must write in your sleep. Well, obviously you do, but...
Well, yes. I get the fairies to do it.
Yes, right. But
they're very well trained.
But and they're all good books. They're all fabulous, fabulous books with tons of information. I mean, 2 of them are encyclopedias, for goodness sake. It's just
then
amazing.
I learn, wherever I go, I learn, and I've learned so much in Australia that I will follow up, I will develop, and again, it will reflect, like the New Zealand material, in future books. So for me, it's not work, it's pleasure. Yeah,
well, that is very, very, comes through very strongly in your writing and all that you've had to say. Thank you for being such a fabulous guest.
Well, thank you for talking to me.
And you're welcome back any time, and we hope to see you again in Australia.
Yes, and I will let you know when I get some feedback on the little brown people.
Do that.
Okay, thank you very much.